Okay. So this is our 484 final project interview with Professor Agarwal and Julie Reynolds. Thank you for being willing to be interviewed for this. We've seen you in all the lectures, and I think it's a really good opportunity for us to get to know you better and know your story. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Julia.
Thank you. I took 488 over the summer, and I felt like it was such a wonderful course, but it moved so quickly. So I'm excited to get to spend a little more time together now.
Yeah, that was intensive because you were covering like 2 weeks worth of stuff in a week, and each week had a lot to do. So it was like, I think you're pretty much running a sprinting to that. Yeah.
That's definitely what it felt like.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I'm doing the first half that covers the overview, introduction, and background, and then Julie is taking the second half, which is about your beginning of career in the IS field, significant accomplishments and impact within the field. So my first question for you, Naresh, is if you have any quotes that you would like to give us in terms of like just a quote that you like or think is relevant to the field of information science. I know we both looked at your website, but if you have something that you'd like to share with us, I think that'd be a good place to start.
So when you say a quote to describe information science, you think? Is that what you're...
Yeah, I think that's what's supposed to be, right, Julia?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe just like a summary if we said information science and you were to respond to that.
Okay. So I think we are in this cusp where our lives are a mix of in-person virtual and online, in-person real face-to-face, as well as online in a virtual world. And I think so we as human beings are straddling between this the real world and the virtual world. And maybe some people will talk about other worlds like psychological world, spiritual world, and all of those. But basically these two worlds that we see, and right now we have this interview over Zoom, so that is a virtual world. And so I think there is this big tension in the world in terms of how to balance this face-to-face versus online. For instance, when you are talking online or when you're on the phone, people will ask you to be more physically present. But what if you do not like the physically present and want to be transported into the digital present? Or if you are too much into the digital, and then what if you feel like escaping from there and coming back to the real world? So there is a lot of ways of like a navigation between these two. And I think we are into this world where none of these worlds will exist in isolation. So we will sometimes be in the fully real or physical, sometimes be in the fully virtual or online, and sometimes move between these two in a more hybrid sort of world. So when we think of information science, I like to think of a triangle, like where we have the person as a center, a person which could be the user or the actor, and then we have information on the other side. So it's basically interaction between the person and information, and which is often mediated by technology. So technology has become so central. So technology is often there, even though sometimes when you're talking face to face with someone, then technology is not there. So this interaction between the human being, information, and technology, and the spaces between that, and the various fields that are in this interaction, and which you think about it, a lot of fields are covered within that. When we think of, let's say, human-computer interaction, or computer-supported cooperative work, or online learning, or pedagogy, or health informatics, or whatever. There are various fields which can come within the space of interaction between humans and information and technology, and that is what I like to describe as information science in a way that a layperson can understand.
Okay, great, thank you. So my first question for you is just in terms of your background, like where and when were you born? I know you said that your virtual background now is from the place where you grew up. So
yeah, so I grew up in a tiny, like thumb-shaped state of India called Sikkim, and that thumb has like multiple countries. So it has Nepal to the west, and then Bhutan to the east, and then Tibet, which is now a part of China, to the northern part of it, and then the rest of India to the south. And this state used to be an independent country until 1975, after which it became a part of India. So it's a very interesting place. It's a state of India now, and it used to be an independent kingdom, an independent country. And interestingly, it is, I believe, only 1 or 2 times in the history of the US when an American woman has ever become queen. And a woman called Hope Cook, who was from New York, she became the queen of Sikkim. And so that is part of the history of that place. And so I grew up there. It's a mountainous region, the 3rd highest mountain in the world, and which is the Kanchenjunga, and that you can see, I can see from my home window. And so I think I grew up in that very natural environment, surrounded by trees and hills and mountains. And so that was part of my childhood. And it's interesting because when people think of me as Indian and coming from India, they think of India as a hot country. But I grew up in a very cold part of a hot country. So in that sense, I feel at home in Massachusetts. But even then, I think Massachusetts is colder because growing up, we never saw snow on the streets. We saw snow in the mountains at a distance. So it was there.
Yeah.
So it was nicer in the sense that it wasn't all that cold. I mean, it was cold then, but not as cold as it's here in Massachusetts. But the downside was that the homes, they were not heated, and here they are heated. So overall, it's more comfortable here because of the heating, even though it's colder. So that is where I grew up in, and I had this formative years there. So I think I read in one of the books, I think it was by The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which I think which said that if you want to know about a person, you need to know about where the person grew up in. And I believe that is what stays with a person throughout the first 10 or 20 years, wherever you stay, and that hometown, that locality, and all that sort of stays with you throughout your life.
Right. So what were you and your family like growing up? Like, did you come from a big family, a small family, or?
So I was the youngest in a very large family of 7 brothers and sisters. So I had like 4 sisters, and I was the youngest of 3 brothers. And I was pampered I would not say pampered, but I was loved throughout, and I felt that all the while with my from my sisters and my grandmother at that time, and so we lived in a big joint family, and so I had my grandparents there and my parents. So it was, and I was loved throughout. I think so my grandmother would have some sweets, and she would like save a portion for me, and then give the rest to my mother to divide amongst my rest of my siblings. So so I was sort of pampered in that way, and so in school as well, all my teachers loved me, I think, and so that's one thing that I felt throughout until now, that I've always felt very loved, and I sort of took it for granted. But when I talk to a lot of other people, I see that a lot of people have a sense of being wronged at certain points in time, and I haven't felt that. So in that sense, I feel very, very blessed and very fortunate. And until now in Simmons, like I feel I'm working amongst some of the greatest people in the world, and including my students such as yourselves. I think I always admire and feel very lucky amongst like where I've been and where I am.
Is your family still living there, or did they move?
No, they're all living there. In fact, my family moved to Sikkim from the western state, desert state of Rajasthan, to Sikkim in the year 1902 or so, and my father was born there. My father passed away last year in September 2020 due to COVID. So, but the rest of my family is all there right now. Yeah.
Okay. So, what would you say are the kind of things that influence like who you would become or who you are now in terms of like, education, jobs, if there are certain events or people that maybe you looked up to, or just had a big impact on your life?
I think first and foremost it was my teachers. They had. I think I was a favorite of a lot of teachers. I still am, I think, and I'm glad that I'm connected to a lot of them on Facebook now. But I had this thing about not letting down people, and because they had this huge expectation from me, I always felt that I had to live up to their expectations. So that helped, I think, in a sense that of letting me not settle with something lesser than myself, or what I was capable. So that was one thing, and the second big event was when I got a scholarship to study in Singapore. And because I was in this very small town, I had never seen a small town in India. I hadn't even seen trains until a very long time. And then in 1995, when I was like around 17 or 18, that's the time when I saw the airport for the first time. And then I took the first flight when I got this scholarship to go to Singapore and study computer engineering. And I was very lucky in the sense that I got this scholarship to go abroad, which was 100% scholarship. So I didn't have to take any money from home, and it became like much more affordable than having had to even study in any college or university in India. And it suddenly propelled me into a whole different league. I think, in fact, I'm about to finish work on a book that I've been writing for the past 2 years on the stories of 25 people who came from India and went to Singapore to study, and now have found the ikigai, or reason for living in different spheres of life. From being one of them is like the head of Facebook India. One person that was a chief product officer with Uber. One person became a monk. Somebody became like a pilot. Somebody became a social worker. Like all kinds of very interesting profiles. Somebody became an inventor. Somebody became a world traveler. So it's how you found your reason for being. So I think getting that scholarship was a big life-changing event, I would say. And so there are different milestones. Then I would say coming to the US was another milestone. My wife is a physician, so she didn't get a job as a doctor in Singapore, so she had to come to the US at that point. And now when we look back, that was a good event in hindsight, even though it was trying for those 3 years. And that all those kinds of events, I think every event, one of the things I realized is that they're quite small when they're happening. You don't realize it as much, but something that happens or doesn't happen does change your life in fundamental ways when you look back and move forward to a different phase in life. So I think for the last 12 years or so, since 2009 when I joined Simmons, I think that was an interesting thing. In fact, or even if you look like as a micro event within that, I went to one of the conferences, which was the ACIST annual meeting in Columbus, Ohio. That was my first annual meeting. And at that point in time, I was going to various conferences to interview for job positions. And I met Professor Jim Boffman, who was the head of the search committee then. And I was just coming out of the room, and he was coming in. And then I said that, Professor, I've been applying for jobs. Have you had a chance to look at my CV? And then he was late coming in, I think. And I was coming out at the point, and he said, "Come on, let's sit down, let's talk." And then we sat and talked for some, I think it was almost an hour, like 30 to 60 minutes. And then he said, "Okay, our dean is here. I'd like you to meet her." And then it was Michelle Coonan, who's still she's going to retire this year. And then he made me meet with Michelle, and there was another professor then, Sheila Den. And then they asked me if I would like to come, if I'd be willing to come to another conference, Leeds, in January. I said I wasn't coming, but I will come now. So I went to Leeds. I got interviewed there again, and later they invited me to a campus visit. So when I look back now, that chance meeting with Jim Boffman in that little room at the conference venue was the reason I'm talking to you right now today.
Yeah, I think it's funny how little things like that can sometimes lead to big events in your life.
Yeah.
So what jobs and professional positions have you held up? Obviously, you're a professor now, but did you have any other positions in education before, like maybe being a teacher's assistant or something like that?
So the scholarship that I got in Singapore was to study computer engineering, and I got trained as a software engineer. So I held different jobs. I held 4 different jobs, and before that an internship and it was all in technology roles. My first job was with Hewlett Packard, where I did like an internship while I was still in the university in my second year. And once I graduated, I worked in a small company called Media Ring. And at that point in time, I would describe it as we create software that allows you to make a phone call from a computer to a computer, or from a computer to a phone and a phone to a computer. Now, of course, it's Skype and all that and Zoom. Like it's all so normal now. But in 1999 to 2000, that time when I was working for it, it was a big novel thing. And I was part of the small, like five-person team that was developing the server interface for that. And after that, from Media Ring, then I went to a US based company called Innova Solutions, and it was a system integration company in the sense that it provided it again built software to connect like different parts to different things to different people. And I worked with a very interesting person who was the chief strategy officer of the company, and his name is Rich Marino. We are not connected on Facebook. So there was another of my colleagues, and he and I sort of became his right hand men. So I learned a lot from Rich, because I thought like Rich was kind of this ideal boss that I had, and I really admired him. So he would tell us things like, so I'd work really hard. There'd be days when I'd be sleeping under the cubicle and really coding like all the time. And then he would say that, go back home. And the reason is because what Rich would say is that you have to think yourself as being in the army. So he said, when you're in the army, you never know when the enemy will attack. And so which means that you have to sleep when you can. You should not waste time not sleeping when you can be called to fight in the battle at any point in time. So the days when we didn't have any work, he'd really prod us to go back home, because there were other days when we had to work late. And there were lots of interesting things. In fact, once we had we worked for like 4 days non-stop. Like I did not sleep at all for like 4 nights, and we created a piece of software that using like a HL7, which is a protocol for medical devices to communicate with each other. And we built a system for that using Java, and that was done in 4 days, which would typically be done in 18 months. So we really had the chief technology officer and chief strategy officer. They would come us and supply us with pizza and take care of us in that way all the time, like making sure we were well fed, and we were just sitting there and coding all the time. So it was that job. I was in California during the time when the September 11 attacks happened. So it was during that year. The following February, they sent me to go to the India office in the southern Indian city called Hyderabad. And that was really nice, because I had actually left India when I was really young, and I hadn't had a chance to experience what it was like to work in India. So it was nice to go to a different part of India and have a few months working over there. It was also nice because I could get my parents to come over and stay with me, and we toured a lot of that part of India at that point. They also needed some surgery, so they got those done. And later I came back to Singapore, and I joined a bioinformatics company. So it was a health informatics company, and it was a small company. Again, I learned a lot through that. In fact, my experience with that company was instrumental in me getting into Simmons, because Simmons had, when I joined, they were looking for somebody with an information science background, but also somebody who had some experience with health informatics, because they were trying to start a new program in health informatics then. So that experience became instrumental in being able to distinguish myself from maybe the other candidates that might have been there. And after that, I joined a digital cinema company, which again was very interesting, where we had to build the software for servers for digital cinema. And I got to travel to small towns and cities of India, setting up digital cinema servers in small theaters, and later to Los Angeles and getting to work with Disney and on Warner Brothers and Technicolor, which processes the Hollywood films. And so it was a lot of I think high-profile work in that sense. But it was also very intensive, because you had to work there during the day in US time, at the Pacific time in San Francisco area, in Los Angeles, and then liaise with the Hong Kong people and Singapore people at night. So there wasn't much sleep that was happening, but it was a lot of learning experience. But I did reach a stage where I felt that I wanted to go back to studying, and I was contemplating doing an MBA for a long time, and I prepared for GMAT a couple of times, but never got myself to take the exam because I couldn't justify why did I want to do an MBA, and if it was just for the money, that didn't interest me so much. And that's when an opportunity came for me to be a research assistant for a professor in the National University of Singapore. And so I went there and joined there as a research assistant, and then at the same time applied for a part-time PhD. So that's how my life trajectory changed from the industry to going into this whole academic world. So and that's why, to your initial question, I became a teaching assistant as well. I was a research scholar, and then I finished my PhD then. Yeah.
Is there like one specific thing that motivated you to go back to studying, or was it just, did you always have a desire to go back at some point? Or
no, I didn't have a desire to go back. In fact, I was so happy to have finished my undergrad, and I was ready to go out there and earn. So I think earning was really nice, that I felt independent and be able to buy and afford things that I could. But after a few years of working in the industry, I found that a lot of my life was just centered around sitting in front of a computer and writing code. And the initial excitement soon wore off. And also I found that in the life of a software engineer, there is no respite. So there is always the deadlines that you have are yesterday. So which means you're always chasing, you're always behind no matter what you do. So you are always doing that. You're always trying to like work on that. The other thing is that whatever you learn is outdated. So or whatever you know is outdated very quickly. So you're always chasing to just play catch up. And so there were a lot of these factors, and I didn't feel a sense of motivation into looking forward. Like when I saw my career trajectory, like it was becoming like, okay, a project lead or a project manager or a bigger thing, and I said, no, that's not how I want to spend my life. And so it didn't really interest me so much, and I started thinking of moving away at that point. So I think coming to academia and becoming a professor really helped me get to where I want to be, in the sense that firstly, I realized that I do not like a regimented life, a 9-to-5 thing, is showing up and going away. So as an academic, it gives me the flexibility to create my own schedules, even though it's much more busy, because most of the time I hardly sleep like for more than 6 hours or so. Like it's intensive. I'm working all throughout, but I feel I can change the time is up to me. So for instance, like this is at 2 p.m. At 2:30 or something when we started talking to each other for this interview. If I'm in a 9-to-5 job, I would have to say, okay, we'll talk in the evening hours. So a daytime interview would not be possible in that sense. So I like this flexibility. And also the other advantage is that the research papers that you write as a professor, or even as an academic or a PhD student or a master's student, those take time to get published and peer reviewed and all that. So as you get older, you get more and more papers, and you get more and more valuable, which is exactly opposite of the life of a software engineer, where as you get older, you become less valuable. I mean, not necessarily less valuable in that sense, but you're always playing catch up. Here, by default, as you get older, like you have more papers behind you. So it was an easier profession to get older, as compared to, let's say, acting or modeling or software engineering, where the older people are less preferred.
Okay, that's interesting. My friend is a software engineer, and he seems like he's always behind.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I do want to emphasize that I'm teaching technology courses. I'm encouraging my students to learn technology. So I think my interview would be very demotivating for them in that sense. But I think what I would like to say that I would say this after having become a software engineer, having worked for it. So I think if you're on the opposite end, I really encourage people to get to that. I would say that before you want to get away, you have to first get there, I think. And after getting to Simmons, I was again pulled into teaching technology courses. So I think I feel very fortunate that I understand technology very deeply. And if I hadn't, then I feel my life would have been much less efficient than what it is right now. Okay, yeah, Patrick, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting you. Yeah.
That's okay. So how did you decide to get into information science? Was that like, did you always have an interest in technology and information, or how did that come about?
Okay, so that's an interesting point. So when I joined as a research assistant for my professor in Singapore, at the National University of Singapore, I had he was a person. He was the CEO of a company as well, and also a professor, and Professor Danny Poo, and he was his area was information retrieval and search in the search space. So the company that he had was also developing search engines. So a lot of the work that he wanted me to do was in the space of looking at ways to improve search and the technology behind that and all. So search was an aspect of it, and I always had this thing about trying to maximize what I do. So I didn't want to do something separate for my PhD than what I had to do for my job as a research assistant. So I wanted to do one thing and then have it counted towards my job there, as well as whatever I had to do for my PhD. So I did not pick the area in a way. I started going into that search space naturally. And then as I started doing that, I saw that there was another field called seeking, which was the same as the interaction between a person and technology to like a search engine. But then seeking is when you can have an interaction with another human being to look for information as well. So that's how I started getting interested in these theories of information seeking behavior. One very influential person who I was influenced by was Brenda Derwin, her sense making theory. So she was a professor in the University of Ohio at Columbus, and a book called Looking for Information by Donald Case. And so I learned a lot from that book, and I started getting into that space, and I realized that there's this thing called information science where all of this thing resides. So it was more from coming from information retrieval and search to going into information seeking to going into information science, and then getting a job in a school of library and information science. So that's how it all happened.
How do you find working with librarians?
Sorry?
How do you find working with librarians specifically? I'm just thinking of 488 and the fact that you teach a core course for people who aren't necessarily as interested in technology.
Yes. So when I was in Singapore, I also developed and we published a paper on an interlibrary loan system. So I was working with a lot of undergraduate students, and we were doing projects and writing papers based on that, along with my professor. So even as a PhD student, I was advising undergrad students at that point in time. So the interlibrary loan system was one of that. And when I came to Simmons, I didn't really have any prior library experience as such. But the first course which I taught, and I taught that for many years, was a course called LIS 403, which is Evaluation of Information Services. And that entire course was about taking any library system or a service and then trying to improve it by gathering data in a systematic manner through surveys and interviews and so on. So it was trying to teach all those methods. So I think in the course of teaching that class, I learned a lot about the library field through my students. And so over the past many years, I have been doing research on the space of knowledge management in academic libraries. And in fact, we now have a book proposal that's being reviewed by Routledge about knowledge management in libraries. So I've published a number of papers with one of my close collaborators with whom I publish a lot of papers. His name is Anwar Islam. He's now an associate professor at Dhaka University in Bangladesh. Before that, he was a student in Japan. And so I have been working a lot in the library space, but I think a lot of my learning has been through osmosis from my students, from my colleagues, and from all the work that I've read and papers that I've read and all that. And I do not have direct working experience in the library, but I feel but it feels very naturally to me. So I don't feel that I'm an outsider or disconnected in any way. I think I feel it very much as a part of me or my DNA. The other thing that I find, which is there in Simmons, is the service orientation. So whether we have the School of Library and Information Sciences there to serve patrons, or we have the School of Nursing, again to serve patients, or you have the School of Social Work. So all of these various schools, of course, we now have the business school as well. But I find this social justice as a big underlying part which is there amongst the faculty, the staff, the students, and I feel myself as a part of that orientation. So I think when I first joined Simmons, I was this question was asked to me by some of the people interviewing me, was that how would you fill this gap in terms of your not coming straight away from a library background. But interestingly, what my background has been is that I have always been this person who has connected various things. So I came from a pure technology background. I worked in the space of voice over IP initially, and then I worked in the space of telecom related projects and all that when I went to California, and then worked in this bioinformatics space, and then went and worked in digital cinema space. So it was all very new domains when I came in. So in that sense, information science or adding the library part to it just felt very natural, because my entire way of thinking was all about taking a field or connecting it and trying to connect it with something else, and bringing that understanding of being able to connect things and people. And that has always been there. So when I think of our field now, I feel that at the center of it is the person and information. So whether it's just a setting that has changed. So when we think of library, it's just a setting where information and knowledge is organized in a certain manner in the forms of books, periodicals, and e-resources, and so on.
So I have two more questions, and then so the first one is, what obstacles or challenges did you have to overcome to get to where you are now?
Either it's my personality, where I feel that I'm an optimist, so I have a blind side to the obstacles, or I've been extremely privileged and lucky. So I feel that a lot of my journey has been easy, but maybe that's not correct. Maybe I'm just looking at not looking at the obstacles, but I think that you have to think hard on the obstacles, because I feel so privileged all throughout. Because in my hometown, when I was studying, I got to study in the best school of the state. Then I got this scholarship where I get to study in a top university in Singapore, which is now amongst the top 20 universities or something in the world. In that sense, we'd had this great infrastructure. Then even when I came to Simmons, it was in the top 10 LIS programs in the country. And I just feel that there are these jumps, but I think getting was not easy, in a sense that when I first applied for a job as a professor, the first year I did not get a job. I applied in various places, and I did have a campus visit at Fordham University in New York, and I asked them that why didn't I get it, and they told me that they felt that I was too early, and I was not close to finishing my PhD. And I took that as a feedback. And the following year when I applied, I made sure that all my data analysis and data gathering all were done. And so when I went for the campus visit, when people saw that I was ready to take on the job, and not like early on in my PhD process. So, but I did apply to, I don't know, maybe I sent in like more than 200, 300 applications to a lot of universities and places. I kept sending those. And in the first ASIST conference, I think I had around 17 interviews or something, and then I went to another conference. At least there I had around 14 interviews. I even went to France for another conference and some other places. So I had these series of interviews over there. So I think there were a lot of these kinds of challenges in terms of the number of interviews and all that. And I also went through this phase in the year 2000, which could be where people go through something called a midlife crisis. And I went through that crisis when I was like very young, around 23 or something. And that was my quarter life crisis, where I felt that I've achieved whatever I had to in my life, and nothing interests me anymore, and I don't know what else to do. Like because in school I had aimed to like top my school, like get the highest scoring person in the class 10th board and all that. So I did that in the 10th and 12th. Then I wanted to become a software engineer. Then I did that. And I felt that, and also like as a student, I could buy my own music system, and I could. When I went to the US, I bought a car for around $1,000. Like I had my own car, which was a used car, and but that was later. But before that, even before I went to the US, I bought my computer for $3,300, like which was one of the early computers with an 8 megabyte RAM and so on. So it was a really slow computer, but one of the top. Like I thought, like that was the biggest thing to buy at that point, and I could do that without bringing any money from home. So I could save money from my scholarship money and pay through that. So I felt this big lack over, like, okay, what else do I do in life? There's nothing more for me to aspire for. So I think that those kinds of churnings really helped me think through as to what really matters in life, and get these various life lessons. I think that was the first time, in a way. I went through that again to a much lesser extent when I got my tenure at Simmons, which was in 2015. So you always need to think as, now what? Like every time you achieve something, you feel a sort of a vacuum because you find yourself on the top of a hill or something, and then you're like, oh, do I fall from here? Do I go back? Like what do I do? Like what next? And I think that's where you start thinking about what really matters in life, and you get to certain stages about the meaning of life, or the meaning of your place in the world, and your role, what do you want to do, and so on. So I think those were there. The last year was also very tough because in 2020 I lost my father, and then 3 months after that I lost my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, and he was like a mentor to me. So also to COVID. So looking at those and processing that, and also there were other things related. So one of my former students at Simmons, he died of COVID as well early on in the year, and he used to be in close touch. He used to email me all the time. And another friend of mine from Singapore, he lost his wife to cancer. So he's in California now. So I think processing that, and also looking at people's grief in general, and looking at the world, and that's not just me. I'm sure all of you, you all have had your own difficulties in terms of the whole COVID year in various ways, or have had known friends and families who have dealt things in different manner. So I think all of these experiences make you think what really matters in life. And one thing that comes forth, I think, in my understanding, is that what you achieve or what you do, the number of papers you publish, or the number of books you publish, or the so-called successes, does not really matter at all. What matters is, are you compassionate or not? Are you there for each other? And are you trying to be useful every single day to a person next to you, to somebody you're working with, or living with, or interacting with? And I think if we do not have that, if we do not have that empathy, if we do not have that sense of compassion in our everyday behavior, then all our achievements are really zero. Like they can go down the drain. They don't really matter at all. But if we have the compassion, if we are living every single day with a sense of gratitude, then I think everything that you do has some value. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
That's fine. I think it was a pretty in-depth answer, actually. So my last question for you before I turn over to Julia is, how did you decide to pick information behavior and knowledge management as your particular areas of interest?
Yeah, so when I was doing my PhD in Singapore, one of the things which I learned from my professors then is that the most difficult thing is to come up with a research question for your PhD study. And the lesson was that whatever question you come up with, you might end up spending at least 20 years of your life around that question. So people say that be very, very careful about what question you want to study. And I think we first did a study looking at a search system and trying to build various interfaces for search and trying to evaluate that. So I gathered data from 192 people, 192 students, and we did interviews from that. And also my professor, he had a research grant, so we paid like $10 to every person who participated. So almost $2,000 in paying the study participants. And that study failed because in the system that we had developed, there was not enough intervention between the study group and the control group, and so it was sort of a failed experiment. Then later on, as a follow-up, I did a survey study, which was a large survey study with more than 350 people. So that was a big part of my dissertation. Now it's a paper with JSIST, and context became a big part of what I was studying then. So later in 2017 and 18, I ended up writing a book on that. So sorry, I forgot the first part of your question. What was it? Could you repeat that so that I can get to the point?
Sure. Sorry. Like, how did you decide to pick information behavior and knowledge management?
Yeah.
As,
So yes. So I think so. Information science was a part of that, and looking for information, the source choices. So how do people look for sources? So I think that all became my study questions with time. And when I was a PhD student, I also got a chance to go to Suzhou, China, for a doctoral consortium, and there I got a lot of mentoring from top researchers in the field. So there again, I got to be interested. But the two main influences were the book Looking for Information and Brenda Derwin's theories and so on. So those really helped me go towards information behavior. But and knowledge management happened because one of my professors then, Fan Shan Ling, in Singapore, he used to teach case study method, and his area was knowledge management. So I started getting interested in that, and along with my professor, we developed a small system called KCOM, or Knowledge Community, where the idea was, what I was trying to show in that system was that every person, like we talk of people as experts versus not, and I wanted to debunk that. I wanted to say that every person is an expert, just that in different areas. So for instance, so I came up with these 3 questions. Name 5 things that you're good at, 5 things that you're experienced in, and 5 things that are passionate about. So I thought that if we ask these 5 things to every person, and we did that through that system, then we'll realize that every person is an expert, maybe in some different things. And as you answer more questions in different fields, you yourself develop that expertise as well, or discover your own expertise. So that's how I got interested in knowledge management. And even during my PhD years, I wrote a number of conference and journal papers on knowledge management. But when I first came to Simmons, I had other areas, such areas. So I had knowledge management, information behavior, technology adoption, maybe like things like innovation and happiness as well. So there were a number of areas, and my dean, that Michelle Kuhn, said that you should have a more narrow research focus. You cannot have many areas. So she said just have 1 or 2 keywords in terms of what your research area should be. So then what I did was I took all my publications, created a word cloud, and see which keywords jumped on top from all the publications. And that's where I found that information behavior and knowledge management were like, these were the 2 main keywords that sort of were a commonality between all the papers. And then I took that as my research areas then.
Good, thank you. And I'll turn over to Julia for the rest of the questions.
Thank you. I love how specific your anecdote about the word cloud is. It's like a really nice, clear answer. So I was curious if you could tell me more about your book, Exploring Context and Information Behavior, and specifically why you said chapter 3 might be representative of your scholarly work as a whole.
Okay. So usually what happens when you're doing a PhD, and after you finish your PhD, typically people try to take out a few papers from your PhD work. So my dissertation had 3 parts. The first part was something called an integrated model, where I took various models and theories of information seeking and tried to put that together in the form of a unified, of an integrated model. The second part of that was coming up with various frameworks of context, because as I was doing my study on the source choice, why do people look for certain information sources or go to certain people for information? My advisor then, my co-advisor, Calvin Shee, he asked me he asked me, Naresh, why did you go and do some literature review on context and find out what context really means? And I did that, and then I realized that what was it getting me into. Like after a month of investigation, of reading and reading and reading, and I've written that in the intro to my book, I found that I was peeling onions, because I read something, I uncovered another layer, and I read something else, it uncovered another layer. So it became like a huge beast, like a huge, like Brenda Derwin likes to call context like an unruly beast, which is very difficult to tame. So context was like that. It was very, very hard to define. So around the same time, I was also very interested in identity as a theory, and the theory of identity really helped me try to uncover and understand what context was. And I had what I thought was a moment of epiphany, where I tried to when I understood what context really means. I think in a way, like after a month. So I put that in my dissertation, and I had a conference paper based on that in terms of that part about context. And after I came to Simmons, I was supposed to have like a journal article where I wrote about that. So I had the journal article that was ready, and I think I sent it somewhere, and it came back with revisions or something, and it became like it became an article which was ready to go somewhere, but it also felt like it had the seeds of a book. And then I decided not to send it anywhere and just write a book based on that. So when I was thinking of going up for a sabbatical after my tenure, I wrote a book proposal, and I sent it to Morgan and Claypool, and Professor Gary Marcinini from UNC Chapel Hill. He was the editor of that book series, and he accepted my book proposal, and that's how that became a project that I could take up during my sabbatical years. For my sabbatical year in 2017. So I had like 6 months off during that time, and then another 3 months of the summer. So, and the reason why I say chapter 3 is important, because as I was writing that book, the first part, the first chapter was an introduction to what context really means, what are the various definitions which are there, or the various understandings of context. And the second part was the most rigorous, because I had the help of a research assistant, and she helped me gather a lot of data, and I spent many months just trying to write that chapter in terms of analyzing all the research which is out there, because before I go out and say this is what I'm doing, I need to put out there what other people in all over the world in this field have found about context. So I put all the studies and the review of that as a very exhaustive chapter 2 of that. And then chapter 3 was what I had in my dissertation, was my own thoughts about that whole thing of what I say about a moment of epiphany in terms of what context means. All of that goes into chapter 3. But in the process of writing the book, I found that my initial understanding was half-baked. It was not fully developed, and there were holes in that. And in that process of writing the book, I sort of filled the gaps in those holes, understood all the problems, and wrote a lot of the nuances of what context was. So when I think back now, I think that chapter 3 is a very important contribution to the field, because it really tries to put together all of this, in which I feel various amounts of research only has a piecemeal understanding. This that chapter 3 really brings together the field in a very fundamental ways, I feel, and that is where the chapter 3 comes in. Chapter 4 is more of a discussion, and chapter 5 is trying to put it all together and then arriving at a definition of context. But the entire churning of that happens in the chapter 3 of the book. And apart from the book, there was another thing which I wanted to mention, was that I said there were 3 parts to my dissertation. The second part was the context book. The third part was a paper that got published in JSIST. But the first part, which was on integrated models, that part was a JSIST paper. That part came as a class project, and then I submitted to JSIST. And I really looked up to Brenda Derwin as a researcher, because she was like this huge person for me, whose work I admired. And it came back from JSIST saying that your work has been accepted with minor changes. And one of the reviewer comments was really nice, and it was like it was a great set of comments. And in the middle of the comments, it says, you discuss the work of Derwin over here, but I'll not try to hide my identity now, because I'm Derwin. So it was Brenda Derwin who was the reviewer for it, and she identified herself, and she encouraged me to make certain changes to the paper, and the paper was accepted with minor changes. The only caveat was that whatever changes she asked me to make, they were so difficult for me, and she had asked me to buy a book and then understand through that. So it took me almost a year to understand what she really wanted me to change in that. So by the time I made all those changes and all, I finished my PhD. I resubmitted that paper after more than a year, and then at that point in time, it came back with major changes, because they sent it to 3 reviewers this time, and then it had 5 pages worth of changes. So I thought that okay, it seemed again too much to me. So I wrote other papers in the meanwhile, joined Simmons, and then other research continued. So around 2017 or so, I picked up the paper again, but much of the research was old, and then I had to redo a lot of the research along with my research assistant. We put in a lot of work on that, and then sent it to information research, and they liked it, but they again came back with a lot of revisions. And again, it felt like a lot of work in trying to understand those changes. So in between, I published a book, I published other papers. So now in 2021, I've picked up the paper again to address those changes. So I have to incorporate whatever's happened since then. So if the paper does get published finally, it would be 15 years in the making in terms of the research work. So I think what that demonstrates is also my trait of never giving up on incomplete work. So even if something gets shelved for a while, I do pick it up again.
That's amazing.
And that has happened to me with paintings. There's a painting of mine which took 5 years to complete. There was another painting which took 3 years to complete. And there were some research papers that took like 4 years each to get through, with multiple rounds and like various levels of submissions and resubmissions. But I keep at it, even if it's like a slower pace. But I keep at it.
So my next question is, what do you consider the major challenges and opportunities in our field, and the extent to which you can speak to your like vision of the field's future?
The challenges I would say is that our field has the field of information science overall has done a great amount of work, and it is at the forefront of a lot of things. And the downside is that it's not very famous. So when you say information science, or when you say the information behavior, a lot of the people would say information what? Like they'll not understand information behavior. Like it doesn't mean information is behaving or misbehaving. Like what do we mean by when we say information behavior? So I think before that, people would like to think of information behavior as information needs, seeking and use, or information practices and so on. So I think there are other fields which have done similar work, but they're not aware of the work that this field does. So I think one challenge is to make it more famous. And I got elected as the ACES president-elect last year. So I think one of my quests will be to try to make it more international, and I've been working towards that. And in some ways, like I helped start the South Asian chapter of ACES, and there are other chapters being started now. We have an Africa chapter, and then a Canada chapter is in the offing and all. So I think as it spreads to other regions and also interfaces with other fields, I think there's a great opportunity for this field to become more well known. And what was the second part of your question about the challenges?
I think you've sort of captured a lot of it, but it's what's your vision of the future of the field?
Yes. So my future of the field is that I think there are great sets of challenges now. One was this navigation between the physical and the digital worlds that I talked about. So in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been doing research on non-response behavior. So how do people feel when their messages and calls are not responded to? So along with the PhD student, Wanching Lee, we submitted a paper to ACES, and it received a SEGU's Best Information Behavior Paper Award. And now we also have 2 other manuscripts, one which got accepted into a journal, and the other one is being reviewed. But so basic understanding, how do we deal with non-response? Things like that, very simple things. I think there has not been enough research in areas like that. Another thing is like in the area of information stopping behavior and information avoidance. So there were times when the COVID statistics were coming out, like in terms of these many infections and these many growing cases and all. And I found myself not wanting to know about it after a point. I didn't want to know what the latest numbers were and all that. So, and that happens with a lot of people when they get diagnosed with disease and so on, like with, let's say, cancer or another life-threatening disease. They don't want to know beyond a point what's happening. Or some people, when we choose to live within an information bubble, when you don't want to, again, know what's happening with other people because of a lot of information overload. So those are some of the continuing challenges. But I think a fundamental challenge that has especially happened in the last 5 years or so is this idea of disinformation, misinformation, and fake news, where I feel there's such an attack on information that people can take all that you've worked and twist it on the head and try to put lies as truth. And people, and especially for people, if you're not very careful, or if you're not a critical thinker, you do not know how to counter that. And so the big challenge is, how do we take each of our students and train them into critical thinking? So critical thinking in a way where you are able to evaluate what are lies, what are truth, what is propaganda, and be able to not just identify that, and train other people in identifying that. I think that is one huge challenge. The other challenge that I find is that I feel we are regressing as a world and going into a world where we are doing a lot more of us versus them rather than embracing people as a whole. And that's where these areas of diversity and inclusion and equity become increasingly important, because the only way by which we can face the challenges that the world has, things like poverty, things like environmental concerns, climate change, there are lots of different challenges. We can face these only if we start fighting with each other. So I think how to embrace each other's in a more holistic way, that's a huge challenge. The other challenge is mental health and loneliness, because I find that a lot of people, we are all connected virtually, but that human touch and being able to have the sense of community, being able to have the sense of friendships, that is missing a lot. And especially during COVID, with the lockdowns and people getting locked inside their houses, that became even more aggravated. So I feel that overall, as a race or as human beings now, we might have 5,000 friends on Facebook, but people struggle to have five real friends to talk to. So I feel that one of the biggest things that we can do, and I try very hard to do that, is to talk to people. And a lot of people want to be listened to, but there are not very many people listening to people. So I feel that anytime anybody is there wanting to be, who pings you, right, take that very very seriously, and do not ignore people, and do not like ghost on people, like, really don't be passive aggressive. I think very simple things about compassion in that sense. And I find, and if you can even have 10 minutes to talk to someone, I would say do that. And these seem like very small challenges, but these were not there, because when I grew up in this cold part of India, as I talked about in Sikkim. It used to be very cold, and we used to have a fire. My grandmother used to be there. A lot of us would gather around the fire, and we would be heating oranges and other kinds of fruits and vegetables. And it was sort of a barbecue in a way, but with vegetables. And we used to sit around the fire, and there would be like stories going around. And it was a very normal everyday ritual. There was not technology wasn't there, but there wasn't this thing about people being disconnected from each other. Our houses was always open. People could come in anytime. There used to be tea served all the time, and so you could go in any of your houses at any point in time. We didn't have a television in our house, so a bunch of us would gather in our neighbors' houses where there was a television, and we would watch TV every evening. And so the sense of community was very natural growing up. All the kids in the streets in the neighborhood would gather, and we'd be playing until evening, until the parents would be shouting for kids to come back home. And now I find that kids are growing up isolated in their homes, just watching videos on the devices. So that sense of isolation is much more, I think, and I feel that as human beings, we do not do well when we do not have that social circle within us. So mental health is a big issue, I think, but that is really stemming from this sense of isolation. So trying to be there for other people, and trying to be there for ourselves, looking at ourselves and other people with compassion, I think, are a big challenges to the world. And I feel that the information field can really help circumvent and bring together all of these things together, because information is central to a whole lot of these things.
Thank you. And I know it's now 3:30, so I don't know if you have a hard cutoff.
I do not. I do have some buffer if you have questions, so I could go on if you have time, if you have questions.
Great. I had two more questions. So one is just, and you've kind of like spoken to this, but very directly, what impact do you hope to have on like graduates in the IST concentration?
So again, I'm really glad that we were able to relaunch the IST concentration in the last 2 to 3 years. And we just got an innovation fund grant that 7 faculty in ISNT faculty we wrote. And we are trying to start a new ISNT virtual lab. So the website should be coming up soon. And we hope that it becomes like a hub where people can talk about research in this field, where students can showcase their projects, and then we can have a way to engage and have talks and events and so on. So I think the ISNT students have a lot of great job opportunities in the areas of say usability and user experience, or knowledge management, or being a systems administrator or a systems librarian. So there are lots of various areas, and not only if you want to go into the more techie or a system side of things, even if you're more interested in the human side of technology, in that interaction between humans and technology, that's where ISNT graduates can come together. So I think I would say, not personally, but as a group of faculty or as a school, I think each of us are having an impact in various ways with each other. And I think it's not just about me impacting the students, but also about the students impacting me, because I learn a lot from the students as well. So I think it's more about supporting each other in this endeavor, because it's impact, I feel, is not made by a huge big thing or a big event. It's made by a series of small events. So all that I really try to do is to be approachable to my students and be there to answer student questions, not just in terms of courses, but also in terms of life events, trying to be compassionate in terms of being flexible with deadlines, giving an incomplete where needed, trying to solve student questions and issues as they arise. So I think these small things would I hope make an impact, rather than just being one big bang, something out there. Yeah.
No, I'm still grateful for in the summer course, I think you made the last section optional, and I remember how relieved we all were to have the extra time to work on our website. It's really silly, but I work full time and I was taking another class, and I still remember that small kindness.
Thank you, Julie.
And for my final question, I was just curious what outside hobbies or interests you see as supporting your work in IST. I think your profile mentions that you paint and a variety of other. You seem like you have many interests. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that.
Thank you, Julia. So I have been painting since I was a kid. Since I was in the first grade, and my sister first taught me how to draw the lotus flower, and I've been doing it since then. And I used to draw pictures of Hindu deities, which are very difficult to draw because they have multiple limbs, six arms or 8 arms and so on. So I used to do that as a child. And then I used to participate in my school in painting contests for the Olympic Day, and have the covers done for the school magazine and so on. And later on, and in my 11th grade in school, we had a teacher who was a fine artist. He came to our school as an English teacher, but he created a painting group, and I learned a lot through him in order to paint professionally. So I created my first oil painting that time, and he also taught me how to use the brush for watercolors and so on. And so since then I've been painting a lot, and not lot by a full-time artist standards. My painting is once every few months, but I've been painting. I've not given up on that. And in fact, in 2020, between the months of May and June, I took almost more than 60 hours of painting workshops from another artist. So I attended a lot of those and did some intensive painting during that period, in which I had to wake up at 5 a.m. and then paint till 9, and then go on to my meetings and other things of the day. But so painting is a big part of what I feel interested in, or probably what I'm good at. And then I'm also interested in a lot of things. So for the past 2 or 3 years, I have been learning the Indian classical music called Hindustani. And I was never a singer all throughout, but that was something that I really wanted to do. So at the age of 40, I took that up, and I was really glad that I could do so, just so that I could have no regrets. Also, when I was in Singapore, I did some acting and modeling for Singapore television. So that was again not something that I want to do as a profession, but I just wanted to do that as an experience. So I was glad I did that, and also created a marble sculpture with an artist for the School of Computing that time. And now, so I have a few things. So I have this painting, then I have the music. I've been learning Sanskrit for the past 5 years, like an hour and a half a week. So that has been going on, because there's a book that I've been writing since 2008. So this is helping me towards that. And the other thing is exercise and fitness, which I feel is very important. So I did like a year with CrossFit in 2019, and last year I didn't do so. I would want to get back to exercise. But one of the things I feel, it's not so much about any of these activities. I feel that every human being should learn, keep learning something new, and the learning that you should take on should not be something simple. It should be something which never finishes, just so that you feel like a student all your life. And I feel that that is very directly tied to happiness. So having this sense of learning and giving yourself something to do is this greater, it gives me a great sense of purpose and meaning. And I feel that when you're growing up, right, you want to get there somewhere, like you feel that you want to become this and become that and become that. And as you grow into your 30s and 40s, you realize that you're not becoming anything. Like whatever you had to become, you have become. Like you have reached wherever you now you're just doing different things. So then it becomes more about how you want to spend your time, what you want to be doing each week. So there's this guy called Alan Watts. Like he's not there because he died many years ago, and I discovered him on YouTube by accident. And when I listened to him, I was so enamored by the way he spoke and what he spoke, that I really felt like meeting him. And I was very saddened to learn that he had died some 30-40 years ago. But his videos and recordings are all there, and they're really nice to listen to. So in one of his videos, Alan Watts says that people teach us that life is a journey. They say that when you're in school, you're supposed to do well in school, and then you're supposed to go to college, and then you're supposed to get a job, and then you're supposed to get married, and then you're supposed to have kids, and then you're supposed to see your kids get married, and so on. So you go from one door to the next, to the next door, to the next. And he says that that's a lie. Life is not a journey, because you're always chasing something which is like which is in the future. And even in the when you see this thing in the US, right, when you say that the pursuit of happiness as one of the things which defines being an American, or an aspiration in some sense. And I find this pursuit as disturbing in a way, because if you talk about the pursuit of happiness, in a way it implies that happiness is not there. It's just a pursuit all the time. Whereas happiness is more of a decision. You can decide to be happy with what you have and not have, and not see it as a decision. So Alan Watts says this very beautifully. So he says that life is not a journey, but life is a party where music is playing, and the music will stop playing at some point. So it is not so much about getting somewhere, but you are supposed to dance while the music is playing, or you're supposed to enjoy it, because whether you decide to enjoy the music or not, the music will stop playing at some point. So that is it about life. So it is just that the music is playing, and for you to realize that other people may not be like just to realize that you're very lucky simply because you're alive, because a lot of other people are not. And realizing that this fact that you're alive means that the music is playing for you, and you have to enjoy that music and sing your song while you still can. Because even if you're still alive, there might be times when you're not interested, or your health doesn't support you, or something might not happen. You don't have the right circumstances. So I think doing all the things that you really feel you're meant to do while you're still young and energetic, I think is important to do, and to keep doing as you get older, into your old age as well, so as to not stop.
Thank you so much. That I think Patrick used the word touching in response to your earlier answer, and I would repeat it here.
Thank you.
Thank you. This interview was wonderful. I think we have great content for our final project. Patrick, I don't know if you have any final questions.
Not off the top of my head, but I'm sure we can send you an email if we think of anything. And I appreciate you being willing to record this and also share the recording with us. So I'm not great with Zoom, so it's good to have someone who knows what they're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you so much, Julia. So I would just say that I'm so glad that you all are doing all this great work, and this class is great. LIS for Theories of Information Science, and I've been teaching that for a while. Professor Rong and I co-developed that, and now Professor Colin Rainsmith has been teaching it face-to-face for a while. Of course, you're doing it online now because of COVID, but otherwise it would have been face-to-face. So it's wonderful, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the course. It's really nice to have more of a theoretical underpinning for a lot of what I'm learning in the concentration.
Thank you, Julia. Patrick. So I'll stop the recording now.